There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day of hunting, he found himself in the middle of the forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He got closer and found the door open. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around the inside of the cabin, he was surprised to see the walls full of several portraits. They were all painted in so much detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred and malice, staring back. He grew very uncomfortable. Making an effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, exhausted, and he fell asleep. The next morning, the hunter woke up. He started blinking due to the unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin didn't have any portraits, only windows. The other side is awake at night. The veil is thinner at night. This is why one of the rules in REZ was when the sun goes down, you go to sleep, and when the sun comes up, you get up. When I was about 10 years old, I lived in a quote-unquote town on the Walker River Paiute REZ. We had electricity, running water, bathroom, and a TV with one channel. I also grew up without those things at some point in my life, just like everybody else on the REZ back then did. My classmates and friends lived upriver from the Indian hospital from where I lived behind. One weekend I ran up to my friend's house to play. Other friends who lived across the fields came over, and we all had a good time as kids playing. As the nightfall came, they all went home, and I was invited to spend the night. My friend lived with his dad, mom, and sisters in a one-room house. Now, they on the other hand, they still didn't have a bathroom. They did have an outhouse, but they didn't have running water. They had a wood stove for heat and cooking, and they also used some lamps. After dinner, when the sun goes down, you go to sleep, and when the sun comes up, you get up. It's what my friend's dad had told me. Even though now that I'm grown, I can't see that happening, well, going to sleep after eating, because my acid reflux would choke me to death in my sleep now. You'll understand later on down the road. So his parents slept in the bed while the rest of us on the floor around the room. There was a window in the four walls, while the moonlight went through. As we laid on the mattress, my friend's dad told me to cover my head with the blanket, and don't look out if I see or hear anything. I remember saying okay, but my curiosity kept me awake. After everyone seemed to be sleeping, that's when I heard the footsteps across the wooden floor, and the sounds of the cupboards opening and closing. I also heard the sound of the wood stove. On a stove there are burners that you open. It's what you use to put the wood in. But I didn't hear any voices. My eyes were adjusted to the darkness, and that's when I saw shadows that appeared to be people. They moved around like they were gliding, but I would still hear footsteps. They looked to be moving back and forth. That's when I nudged my friend and whispered, "What is that?" He then said, "They are spirits, but they won't do anything." That's all he said. After looking at them a bit more, I got sleepy and just knocked out. The next morning, his family was asking me how I slept. I told them good, except that I heard noises like somebody else was inside. That's when my friend's dad said, "You'll get used to it. Just don't pay attention to them." I looked over to my friend, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said, "I told you." After that morning, they took me home. My friend and his family lived about 100 yards from the Indian cemetery. and they told me that they always see some spirits, but they don't do anything. To this day, I'll never forget that time, that night, and I still believe to this day that there are spirits inside of that house. There are some burial grounds all over the place, under the houses, and in the yards, and the bushes, so it's common to see things there at night. You see, out on the REZ, people always say that these spirits won't do a thing to you, as long as you leave them be. They are part of that place now, just like everything else belongs to the land. You don't call out to them, you don't go looking for them, and you sure as hell don't bother them. If you do hear them or see them, you let them pass. You put the blanket over your head and you mind your own damn business. That's how it's always been. Respect them, and whatever you do, do not bring any attention to them. Thanks for reading my story, and maybe if anyone hears it, if it ever does get narrated, what I'm going to tell you changed my family's life, and the way that we live with the world around us, almost how we see it as well. I was 23 years old, and after 3 years of living alone, with bad experiences, bad roommates, and just realizing this world isn't what I thought it was, I had to swallow my pride and realize that my parents were right. I had moved back to live with them, and with my brothers, but we stayed in such a small house that we needed more space when I came back, especially because I needed my own room. What 23-year-old doesn't need their own room, right? My auntie, who somehow got word that the prodigal daughter had returned, she said that Grandma's ranch was empty, and nobody was living there. It was way bigger, a little ways out of town, in the middle of nowhere. Best part was that we only had to worry about maintaining the home and the tax. By the way, this happened when we were living in Mexico. And just like your typical Mexicano family, we all moved into my grandmother's ranch house. She had passed away when I was younger. It was a big house. We actually stayed in it for a bit when I was a kid, before my 2 younger brothers were born. Anyways, when my grandmother passed on, her kids chose to divide that big house into several rooms for rent, or sections, Airbnb style, so they could split whatever income came in, and this way they wouldn't fight over it. I believe there were like 4 rooms in the bottom, and 3 bedrooms on top. It was a 2-story home. They had all invested money into it. They had the whole place remodeled basically. Well, so much time had passed, and that whole Airbnb thing didn't work out the way they thought it was. So my auntie ended up being responsible for it, and she became the sole owner of it. The second floor had been converted into some sort of apartment, separated from the first floor. The way to get inside was through a door and staircase that was built outside the home. But my auntie had told us that the house was basically empty, the whole first floor. Nobody had stayed there in a few years. Now the second floor, someone had started leasing it from my auntie. It was an older woman. Like, she was basically knocking on heaven's door old. So anyways, we started moving in. We were going to be on the first floor, obviously. The older woman lived on the second floor. We started moving our things little by little over the next 2 weeks. We hadn't had the chance to see the woman that was living upstairs. The first time we noticed her was one night when we were moving things inside. We saw her peeking from her window. My brother, one of them was 10. My other brother was 8. I waved at her, but she didn't wave back. She was just staring through the window, but she was making it obvious. Pretty weird, I guess. The next day, my mom, my brothers and I, we all went to go return the truck we used to move with. And we also picked up Rocky, our dog. When we got back to the ranch, we saw her again. Except this time, she was standing in front of her own door, looking at us as we walked towards the front door. She had a very small balcony, if that's what you want to call it, out in front of her door. She could barely walk. I'm saying this because this was the first time I saw her. As we were walking in, I remember it's the first time she spoke to us. She was like, "No animals are allowed here." She sounded irritated, upset. "Well, now they are," my mother responded. "This is my husband and his siblings' house, so they decide, not you." The woman just smiled and walked slowly inside her apartment. I think even Rocky knew this woman was going to give us issues, because you could tell he was very agitated by the woman. He looked at her weird. Rocky was about 10 years old, so we knew just about everything about how he acted when it came to a stranger, when he was nervous, when somebody was going to do something, all of that. While we were inside, my mom told us that my auntie had told her about that woman, how she can have no filter and just say what's on her mind, but to not pay her any attention because, senior citizen or whatever. Even though the house was ours, we tried to keep Rocky inside. Even though it was a ranch, we just wanted to avoid any problems with her. I think this lady had gotten to the point where she thought she was the owner of this property, and she didn't like that we were going to be there. Anyways, she seemed like a ghost. We never really saw her, never went out. She never had a single light on, even when it was dark outside. Maybe she just slept early. I got a job and I worked all day, and I was also attending college, so I was barely home. But on the weekends, I made a deal to watch my brothers when my parents had to go out or do something. I remember one Friday night, my parents told me not to take too long in getting home because they had to go out. Yeah, right, go out. My mom told me that she didn't want my brothers to be alone. I think it was the whole getting used to a new area, but I get it. I wouldn't feel comfortable with some creepy old woman living upstairs. Now that I think about it, what if more people were up there? We are very traditional, even though I'm like an adult now, you can say. I am the one living under my parents' roof, so I still have to abide by their rules. Trust me, being away from home, family, made me realize that this whole mentality of I can't wait to get out, to have my own place, yeah, none of that shit works. So if you're a teenager, a young adult, just listen to me. So when I got home that Friday night, my parents had already gone out. I know because when I pulled up to the ranch, the gate was open, and my dad's truck wasn't there. I guess they couldn't wait. Whatever. When I parked and walked towards the front door, I always expected that woman to be standing there, at the door looking down. She wasn't. It is creepy, especially if you got home late at night. When I walked in, my brothers were in the room, playing video games. They also had headphones on. I asked them if they already ate dinner. They didn't respond, so I tapped on their shoulder, and I basically had to clap to get their attention. I told them to take their headphones and lower the volume. They said they didn't want to hear the woman upstairs, and she had been making noise all day. I guess. I left the room, and as soon as a few minutes passed, and I was in the kitchen, Rocky slept in the living room. I remember it. He perked his ears up, his head, stood up. I thought he was excited to see me, except I noticed what my brothers were talking about. That's when the noises started. It sounded like someone upstairs was jumping from side to side, running all over the place. I assumed the old woman had visitors. Maybe grandkids were dropped off. More like great-grandkids. And so I figured I would go up there and ask her to lower it down a bit. Like, it was getting annoying. I tried taking Rocky with me, just in case, but I couldn't get him past the first wooden step leading to her place. I'm sure he was homesick, just like we all were. I mean, who wants to be living out here in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods and trees, away from people? Even stepping outside, it was just super creepy. It was really dark out there, so I just went alone. When I got to her door, I saw that only the screen door was shut, but the main door was open. There wasn't a single light on. "Hello?" I called out. "We can hear a lot of noise, and I wanted to make sure everything was fine." "There's no noises, girl," came a voice from a dark corner, just a few feet away from the door. "Fucking weirdo." I went back down quickly, without even saying anything else. When I got back, and I made my brother some late snacks, I told him to get ready to sleep, and when I was gonna walk out, my brother told me, "She walks at night. I can hear her walking all around. What if she comes down here?" It caught me off guard, so I was just like, "Rocky'll keep us safe." By now, the old woman gave everyone chills, and that was without us ever seeing her again since her complaint about Rocky that first day. We all called her the creepy old lady. Then, one day, when I was at college, I got the phone call. My brothers explained that they were trying to play fetch with Rocky. They were all outside, but no matter how many times they threw the ball, he wouldn't go get it, maybe just once or twice. But he especially didn't want to go near the stairs. When my father arrived moments later and opened the gate, Rocky ran towards him. Everybody thought Rocky was excited to see my dad, but instead, he ran past him and out into the street. When he did, a truck was coming down the road. Rocky passed away right there and then. When I got home that night, I remember walking in, and I could tell that the lady was up there, standing behind her door. Well, behind the screen door. I knew she was there because I swear I saw her silhouette. We all gathered in the living room, and that's where my dad and mom told me what happened. It was quiet the next few days. You could just feel it in the house, the energy and all. Rocky had been part of our family for a long time. He was basically with us since my brothers were born. Then, about a week later, the old woman started again. It was almost like she had lost her mind. It sounded like she was talking to someone, singing, a bunch of things. The strangest thing about all this always happened when my parents were not at home. I say this because they wouldn't pay much attention to us when we told them about the noise complaints. It's almost like they didn't believe us, because they would never hear anything. At this point, it felt like she was being petty, trying to torture us, making sure we couldn't do anything without listening to her. We even told our parents that maybe we should just move, or that we should kick her out. Of course, they never said anything. Where else could we go? Would we move only because we didn't like our neighbor? One night, I was alone with my brothers when we heard a sound out from the front door. To my surprise, the old woman hadn't made noise all day. Maybe I was just trying to see the good in people, but my mind raced to see what if the old woman fell, and she was trying to ask for help. I got close to the door, and I could hear it, some heavy breathing. I quickly opened the door. It wasn't the woman, a medium-sized dog. It looked like it hadn't ate in weeks. It was standing a few feet away from the door. It was growling, almost barking, towards the old woman's apartment. And even though he smelled and looked all rough, we decided to bring him inside before the old woman could do something, or complain about his barking, or possibly wake her up. So we fed the dog, and when our parents came home, they wondered the same thing, where this dog could have came from. They let us keep him for a few days until we found him a home. The only explanation to this was that the ranch was really big. Maybe the dog got lost and found its way towards here. My mom, who didn't want any more dogs because of the passing of Rocky, was actually the one who insisted that we keep him. I think she just wanted to bother the old woman. I swear these mamas can be the most petty. Anyways, we named him Toby Mac. We were gonna call him Toby, but then we heard some Christian singer called Toby Mac, and that became his nickname, just because it sounds funny. Now here's the fun in all this. I think even Toby Mac hated the noises that the old woman did. When I tell you they were disturbing, they really were. Whenever the noises started upstairs, Toby would actually start barking, like non-stop. It was clear that he didn't like our neighbor. The feeling was mutual. The best part is that she would actually stop the noises whenever Toby Mac would start barking. And so he became part of us, especially to my youngest brother. Toby Mac, also like Rocky, didn't want to go outside. I think whoever he belonged to possibly had treated him bad or something. When we had gotten somewhat used to life in that house, I was at a party when I got a text from my brothers. Come home now. The noises upstairs are terrible. Mom and Dad are not answering. I went with my best friend Jess. She was gonna spend the night over with me, and she heard it too. Those damn sounds and even voices coming from on top. Whenever we walked in, Toby Mac was barking like crazy. At this point my brothers were crying, saying that it sounded like many people were running around above them. The creepy part is that they try to distract themselves by playing video games with headphones on, except it was so loud that the sounds of running above them seemed to move directly over them. Then the sound of jumping, like somebody was trying to break through the ceiling. That was enough for me. I'm not sure if it was seeing my brothers scared when I walked in, and that they had even reached out to me to help them. I went up there with Jess. We started knocking and shouting for several minutes. I knew it was useless. The woman wasn't gonna answer. At some point, I think I knocked and banged on her door for like 2 minutes straight, non-stop. Hopefully she knows how we feel. We went back down, and as soon as we entered the house, the noises started again. At this point, Toby Mac started barking out one of the windows. Ears perked up as well. He would run around and start barking towards the window and the front door. That's when I realized, with all our lights on, if that old lady was out there somehow, she could see inside, and we couldn't see anything. So I turned off all the lights. I told my brothers to wait in the room with Toby Mac, door closed, while Jess and I stayed in the living room until my parents got home. Complete darkness everywhere. Here's the thing, it actually seemed to work. Toby Mac stopped barking. Jess, on the other hand, was sort of laughing a bit. I remember she was like, "What's wrong with your neighbor?" She teased me a bit, and so we were just talking. About 10 or 15 minutes later, she asked me where the bathroom was at. I told her down the hall to the right, opposite of my parents' room, which is to the left. As she got up and was about to walk down the hall, she stood in place. "What is it?" I whisper. "There's someone standing at the end of your hall. Is your mom here?" I quickly stood up, asking if she was joking. I even laughed a bit because I thought she was trying to pull a prank on me, but her voice was serious. I told her to go outside, and I opened my brother's room. I snatched their headphones out of their ears and told them to go outside right now, that we would all go to the car. When I told them, they listened, and when they ran out the room, Toby ran straight into my parents' room. At this point I yelled out at Toby Mac to come, but he didn't. There was a bunch of noises going on in my parents' room. Was it somebody trying to rob us? I walked out the door, and I was yelling out to Toby Mac to come on. It seemed like forever, but maybe it was like 20 seconds, when he came running down the hall towards the front door. We all went inside my car, including Toby Mac. At this point I was shaking. I could tell Jess was scared, and my brothers were sort of alright, because they had their headphones on. I started the engine, and I pulled up right to the front gate, and we just sat there in the dark, headlights on, looking directly at the house, ready to slam it into drive if whoever or whatever was inside decided to come out. Nobody ever did. Jess kept saying that it was a woman standing right there. When my parents arrived a few minutes later, they looked around the whole house, but didn't find anything except a mess in their room. Since only Jess saw her and couldn't describe her, my parents said, what if Jess was only seeing things because it was so dark? They didn't really believe us, But how do they explain the room? So they blamed it on Toby Mac. After that, Jess never wanted to come back to my house. Here's the other weird thing. After that night, nothing. And I mean, there was nothing. No noises. Nothing happened again. It seemed like she didn't exist. This is most likely why my parents didn't believe us either. Now, around that time, my auntie, she got into some legal trouble, including fraud accusations. Crazy shit. And since the house was under her name, we were told to leave until it was resolved, just in case it got seized or something. And so we got out, and so we ended up having to move. My mom asked my auntie if she had told the woman that was living upstairs. My auntie basically said, to be honest, none of us kicked her out of fear. She hasn't paid rent in a few years, but she is an old lady. You can't just kick her out. What the fuck? We've been dealing with this shit just because? It all worked out. In the end, the legal issue was resolved after a few months, but we never went back. We didn't want to. We later found out that the old woman died not long after. Two of her sisters or daughters or basically two people came to get some of her things, but most of it was thrown out. Recently, my auntie, she wanted me to go over and show the main house to a family that was looking to rent. She already had a professional company come clean and organize the whole house, and basically just wanted me to show them the main house, aka the first floor. I remember when I got there, I explained how everything works, how nobody is upstairs, and that basically it's a whole other house. As I was telling them, I heard noises upstairs, but I knew it was empty. Maybe it was just me getting used to those footsteps and remembering, because nobody else seemed to hear them. I almost forgot. There is one more thing. It's pretty sad. A few weeks after we moved, Toby Mac went outside, out the front door, and he never came back. We looked for days, for weeks. We even put up signs, and no one in the neighborhood had seen him. We checked the pound. Nothing. A few weeks later, some puppies were abandoned near the house. We actually ended up adopting them, naming them Rocky and Toby Mac in honor of our previous dogs. But there will always be a space for the original Toby Mac if he ever does come home. The bravest dog that I ever known, who actually seemed to join our family for a specific reason, now that I think about it. Thanks for reading my story. If you love animals like I do, I hope you like it, even if it's sad, or a simple one. To this day, I'm not sure what was going on up there, but I do have an idea. I'm pretty sure it was witchcraft. The REZ has some crazy roads at night. If you grew up out here, you know exactly what I mean. Everyone's heard about the ones who walk or run beside your car, keeping up with you no matter how fast you go. Some people mention about strange fires moving out in the fields. These stories are everywhere. We all know about them. We all heard about them. But this one's different. I'll just tell you what happened to me, even though don't disregard anything that I said, because you do still have to watch out for those who run on all fours. Anyways, 371, that's one crazy ass road, especially at night. I used to take the Borrego shortcut from Pre-Wit, but that road is even more weird. Only reason I took it was so I didn't have to go all the way to Turo after Crown Point, then I-40 east back to Laguna. But after a couple of incidents, I would just go all the way around. The only time was during the day that I took that shortcut. Hell no. So my job required driving to Farmington at least twice a week. There are some strange things that I've seen happen on the highway between Crown Point and Farmington. On one trip, about 8 miles north of Farmington, a woman was standing on the side of the highway. I say this because for a few minutes I was the only vehicle down the road. I couldn't give her a ride because I was in a government vehicle. After I passed her, I checked the rear view mirror and saw that there was no traffic behind me. About a minute later, my eyes started wandering again, looking at everything. When I glanced at the rear view mirror again, there was a black truck about a car length behind me. The woman was sitting between two guys. I started to wonder how they could have picked her up and be right behind me so fast. What happened next is something that I will never forget. It looked like they were gonna pass, so I just slowed down a bit. A few seconds later, I looked in the side mirror. There was no vehicle in sight. I checked the rear view, no truck in sight. There was no side roads where they could have turned off. When I got to work, I shared this experience with a couple of people. I was told that people have seen something called a ghost truck. Has anybody heard about this before? My coworkers ended up making sure I left early whenever I worked in Farmington. It's scarier at night. I still do think about it, and the way that truck just disappeared without a trace. I believe there are spirits out there on the roads, still wandering, and if you're not safe, you might just pick one of them up, and you'll bring them home with you. What would you do if a strange woman showed up at midnight, asking for your dead father by his name? About 15 or 20 years back, I was sitting on my front porch pretty late into the night. I have horrible eyesight, especially in the dark. My eyes just kept picking up motion by this huge cottonwood tree right by my driveway. Realizing it's most likely just the wind blowing the branches, I just ignored it. I was just focused on the moon and smoking a cigarette. It felt like when you see something from the corner of your eye, you look and there's nothing there. It's that feeling. After a dozen times of my eye being drawn to the same place, I realized that this must not be good. I go inside and grab a samurai sword that I keep on top of my TV. I go outside and walk towards my driveway. As I approach the big tree trunk, a woman walks around the tree and she starts asking for my dad. I tell her that he passed away 5 years ago, and I ask her what she wants. She said she was hoping for a ride because she had been walking all day. She said that she had to get to a nearby town by morning. The fact that it was 100 degrees plus earlier in the day, and even now up until a few hours ago, I offer her something to drink. As we walked to the porch, I informed her that my dad had passed away 5 years ago. As I went back inside, I grabbed a big, icy glass of my killer iced tea and gave her some. While she drank, I told her that I didn't have a phone and my car was low on gas. A struggle. She said that she could make it, and she said thanks for the tea. I filled her cup from the pitcher, and wanting to smoke another cigarette myself, I offered her one. We sat in silence for a minute as we both smoked, and eventually the conversation turned to scary stories. I started telling her about something that happened when I was a young kid. I do admit that I was enjoying the company as well, although Oklahoma scenery, the moon, and this is when she blew my scary story out of the water with a few stories that had me feeling a bit of fear. She began by telling me that she had been a Riverside student back in the 70s, which was a boarding school, in case you didn't know. She had been studying until late one night. Getting tired, she just left the light on and leaned back on her bed. Just shy of falling to sleep, she came to realize that she could hear a deep growling. Her eyes popped open and she looked around the room. From where she laid, the entire room was where she could see it all. and there was nothing else in the room. Contrary to what her eyes told her, she ended up hearing some breathing. At this time, she told me that not only could she hear it, she could also smell the breath of something unseen, and it smelled like sulfur with some other things. She said she was close to panicking. She thought back to her upbringing and her grandmother's words. She spoke out loud and telling the presence in her room that it could not harm her. She told it that it had to leave her alone and that it can't touch her. She then said that it got quiet. Then, after a silence of about 30 seconds, that's when she heard a deep man's voice, and he was saying, "Yes, I can." She said that this really messed with her for a long time. I didn't realize my throat was that dry, so I drank from the pitcher that was still in my hand. I was hoping that she was ready to continue down the road, but she continued with another story. "My good friend from New Mexico got it worse than me," she said. She got caught trying to sneak out to snag her man up. She said that they gave her kitchen duty for a week as punishment. On one of those evenings, she was in the kitchen alone washing all the pots and pans. The only entrance to the kitchen was in her field of vision. Soon though, even though nobody could be in the kitchen behind her, she got the feeling that someone was leaning over her shoulder. She resisted turning around for a while, but that persistent feeling of somebody watching was just too much. Right at that instant, when she was going to turn around, a terrible, loud rain started going off in her ear. Whatever it was affected her mentally too. By this time I lit up another smoke. I used to be a chain smoker. She then told me it was a long time before she saw that friend again, and that she had missed so much time in the hospital that she never even went back to school. By this point, I regretted bringing up scary stories, and I just wanted to go inside and watch something funny before bedtime. I just sat there dumbfounded, and I was afraid. I was able to stammer out that I had work for the next day, and that I needed to catch up on some sleep. I gave her about 5 cigarettes and some matches. She then just walked off down the side-end highway. I told my auntie about the events of the night, and all my auntie had to say was, "You didn't see her legs, did you?" Now that I think about it, I sure hope that I wasn't on that porch with the ear woman. I have a story to share about my cousin who came across a pair of Skinwalkers. We are Denye, and we currently live in the REZ. Well, before I speak on the encounter, let me give some family background which will make a lot more sense. My great-great-grandfather was a medicine man. He returned from the long walk, which the Navajo survived. After he came back, he carried with him a medicine bundle, and from what I was told, it had sand from the 4 sacred mountains, and maybe other sacred things too, even though I never seen it myself. It was supposed to be passed down to someone who deserved it, someone who could use it for the greater good. Now, my great-great-grandfather had 2 wives, which wasn't unusual at the time. The first wife, my great-great-grandmother, was given the task of deciding who would inherit the bundle, but things didn't go as planned. The second wife, out of jealousy, stole it. She knew the bundle had powers, and she didn't care that it was meant for good. She wanted it for herself, for her family. We didn't know it was gone at first. We had no idea they had taken it and were using it, until a medicine man told us what was happening. I can't quite remember, but he said he started having visions and signs that something was wrong. Now keep in mind that not anybody can be a medicine man. It takes years, decades of study and practice. He said he started having dreams about the mountains weeping and the land below cracking open and releasing dark spirits into the world, animals behaving strange, storms happening out of nowhere. And so he decided to perform a ceremony to seek answers. During one of the ceremonies, he was guided by the spirits. It was here that he saw the vision more clear. He saw the second family, the stolen bundle, in the dark ceremonies they were performing. The spirits were showing him how they painted themselves with white and blood and sang the evil songs. The vision was so strong that it left the medicine man shaken. He knew that the bundle had to be returned, smudged, and buried or put up in a tree way into a forest. However, he didn't know who these people were or who they were related to. Keep in mind that in the Navajo Nation, you can track your family ancestors, basically your whole lineage. He didn't know who these people were until after the whole encounter that my cousin had. We knew the second family, just never really hanged out with them. However, my cousin on the other hand, I remember he started hanging out with them. He didn't think much of it. After all, they were family. They would share stories in general and offer him a drink or two. And before long, he found himself going with them more often. My cousin wasn't even grown enough to drink, so maybe that's why he was easily tempted into going to hang out with them. Also, my cousin had been going through a rough patch, just like every teenager does in that age of feeling depressed and just feeling a bit lost. Well, this family seemed to offer a kind of refuge, you can say. They were always ready with a bottle to tell him it was good to relax, to forget about his problems for a while. He didn't notice that at first, but they were slowly pulling him in, getting him comfortable. As the weekends went on, the drinking got heavier, and the conversations took on a darker side. They started talking about things that made him uneasy, gossiping about our family, about my great-great-grandpa, grudges being held, even ceremonies at that. I'm not sure what their ultimate plan was. Maybe it was just to use him as a spy or something else. I'll ask my family when I get a chance though, but I don't think they want to talk about this chapter in our lives anymore. So one night, it went too far. He was drunk, laying on the floor, and he woke up sometime in the early morning. The room was dark except for the dim light from the fire. He didn't let on that he was awake. He just lay there with his eyes barely open, listening. That's when he saw two of the ladies. They started doing something strange. He said that he saw them spread coyote skins out in front of them. They started painting themselves with this white paint and what looked to be blood. He said he could feel the air in the room change as well, like something was coming. He then said that they started singing in this low, creepy voice, something about evil. My cousin said that he couldn't hear it all, but he said it made his skin crawl. To this day, he said he's never going to repeat what they were saying or singing, too scared that it might bring a curse on him, which I actually don't blame him. And then, the part he could barely believe. He said as he was watching, they picked up the coyote skins and started wearing them, but they didn't just wear them. It was like the skins became part of them, onto their bodies. He then said that they ran out the door, but that he stayed there frozen, not even moving. When he was sure that they were gone, he grabbed his stuff and ran. He didn't even look back. He went straight home and told his mom everything. My aunt scolded him, told him to stop drinking with them, that it wasn't safe. He did listen and never went back. When my cousin told us this, our side of the family took him to see a medicine man, which is the same medicine man that I told you about in the beginning that found out something was going on, but that he didn't know who this family was, and that's when everything came to light. He took some time, but eventually we were told everything, that they had been using the bundle for dark ceremonies, for evil. The bundle that was meant for healing, for protection, had been twisted and turned into something evil. They had taken something sacred and turned it against what it was meant for. The medicine man did come to our home and he smudged all of us, performing a cleansing ceremony to protect us from any harm that might come our way. The smoke from the sage filled the air as he started singing. He called upon the spirits to watch over us, to shield us from the evil that had messed up the bundle. The ceremony was intense. The air felt heavy with the weight of what happened, but as the smoke drifted away, I did feel a sense of relief, like a burden had been lifted. The medicine man did assure us that the ceremony would prevent that family from being able to harm us. Whatever power they had gained from the bundle, it wouldn't touch us anymore. He He also warned us to stay vigilant, to keep our distance from them. We knew better now. We had seen what jealousy and the misuse of sacred things can do, and we weren't about to let it happen again. After that night, my cousin was never the same. He learned a hard lesson, not just about hanging with people he didn't fully know, but also about the dangers of drinking and letting his guard down. He realized too late that sometimes, even those who seem like family can have dark plans, evil intentions. He did stop going over and stop drinking, and started keeping to himself more, and started learning the traditional way with all of us. The fear of what he saw haunted him, but it also made him more cautious about who he trusted. This is the weird part, and I guess this comes with practicing these things, or maybe doing things you aren't supposed to be doing. Ever since all this went down, strange things started happening to the ones who stole the bundle. One of the men in that family died, and another guy in the family got real sick. And after everything, we just didn't hear from them again. This wasn't just an experience for my cousin, but for all of us as well, to be cautious of those around us, especially the ones who seem nice at first. Not everyone has good intentions, and some will hide their true nature until it's too late. This is especially true here on the REZ. There's a reason why we as Navajo are careful about who we share our stories with and our lives with. It's not about just being closed off as you hear. We learned over generations to protect what's sacred, to keep our knowledge within our community, because once it's out there, you can't control how people will use it. You see, my cousin thought that he was just having a drink with family, but he didn't really know them. So always be mindful of who you become friends with, especially if you live in the REZ. Every old-timer in Alum Creek has their own story of what happened. Hell, even half the young people think they know how it went down. Don't listen to anyone who wasn't there. It's like that game we used to play as young kids where you take a piece of yarn tied to 2 cups and pass it around a circle repeating some sort of message. Telephone. That's what we called it. Only difference is that in the telephone game, the story starts off as something simple and gets more and more crazy as it goes. But this story, it gets more and more credible the younger the teller, almost like it's too much to be believed. So listeners correct for realism when they retell it, so as not to sound crazy. My own grandson told me the other day that I remember it wrong, that it was all just some sort of tragic accident about a bear. Something ain't right about that. A 12-year-old kid telling his grandfather what he should and shouldn't remember. So don't listen to the young people. They weren't there. The truth is, most of us old folks weren't there either. The way we talk, you would guess every miner in town was caught up in it all. Like how every boomer will tell you he was at Woodstock. There was only maybe 20 of us. Of those, a sight more than half are dead and buried, except for old Rashi Singh. The bastard had himself cremated. I'll start over. Forgive me if I repeat myself. 1956. Like just about every young man, I was working in the mines. Hard work. Plus nothing else paid as good. Nothing I was qualified for at any rate. And I had a wife, a kid, and another one on the way to support. Besides, my friends were also in the mining business. Ralph Hatfield, Rashi, and Sid. We would hit the bars after work, with me leaving early on account of the family, and Rashi would just get some juice. Now Ralph didn't much care for the bartender. Most of us didn't. Jesse tended bar not because he was especially good at it, but because he didn't have the stomach for man's work. He even hired kids to mow his lawn and do landscaping. He wasn't ashamed of it. He thought it made him smarter than the rest of us. I don't know if I ever caught Jesse in town without some full sideways grin. Ralph suspected that Jesse got his job by sleeping with the widow bar owner. I don't think so, but it wasn't impossible. Jesse had nearly half a dozen exes, or current lovers. He was smooth with women and had a pretty face, high cheekbones, sharp nose, That was enough reason for most of us to dislike him. Ralph had more claim to hate Jesse than most. Those who aren't from West Virginia probably know all about the Hatfields and McCoys, but that's nothing compared to the families of Ralph and Jesse. You see, during the Cold Wars, Ralph's family fought for the Unions, and Jesse's family owned the mines. But if you gave Jesse a hard time about it, he would always come back with something to say. Jesse was always a funny guy. That, combined with the fact that he never got angry, kept the rest of us from truly hating him, except for, of course, Ralph. June 10th was when it all started. Cicada season. They were bad that year, too. So many damn insects you could hydroplane on their guts if your tire threads were bare. The mine was a safe place from them. You wouldn't have to listen to the never-ending screech. But on this season, the mine was even worse than the outside. It echoed. It's not even pretty sounding like a cricket, at least not to me. So it's no wonder we ended up working deeper than we normally would. We got far enough that we couldn't hear a peep and went to work. A couple of hours into the day, anytime there was a crack, the rest of us were nervous to slide through. But Rashi was a skinny guy and could damn near fit through the bars on a baby's crib. Rashi would have it covered. We waited around for no more than 10 minutes before Rashi squeezed back towards us. I had never seen the man so excited. "Stop everyone right now," he said with an accent. "It's a treasure room. In most mines, the demolition experts calculate the proper amount of black powder, and then everyone draws straws on who has to light the fuse. But most mines didn't employ Sid, the craziest son of a bitch I ever knew. Sid did all the blasting himself. He loved to be as close to the explosion as he was allowed to. Most of us figured that he was going to end up going the way of his grandfather and die in such a blast. But he blew the neck wide open without event, and we all had to look for ourselves. What we saw was a gold mine. Well, no, it wasn't. It was a coal mine, but there was a lot of coal that was easy to collect. The owner was too excited. He hired everyone in town not already working for him, at least twice the normal rate. Even Jesse couldn't resist a few weeks of hard labor for that kind of money. We ended up working like dogs all week, taking as many hours at double pay as possible. Predictably, Jesse was the laziest of all, but we needed him to have enough energy to pour our drinks after work, so no one said a thing. Now, I'm not sure who saw it. I want to say it was Jesse who came strutting back with a proud smile to tell us all of his find. Jesse, or whoever it was, found yet another neck, one that was wide enough that anyone could walk through. The new room was small, but filled with coal. Loose coal, too. That should have been the first sign. Coal doesn't just sit on the surface, stacked knee-deep, ready to be scooped up into bags. But we were greedy, and now we had 2 rooms to work. A handful of guys I barely knew ended up working the smaller room. We called it the Pirate's Chest. I'll admit we were greedy. We robbed pillars and were too aggressive with the cutting machine. But that room, it shouldn't have collapsed the way it did. I've been in natural collapses before. This was not one of them. Some of the miners will tell you that everything was quiet and normal, like right up until the cave-in. But no, there was one sound. A sound that still haunts me even now. The most rational explanation is that the man in the Pirate's Chest shouted before the rocks gave way. But I know what I heard. It was a scream, but not a human one. It wasn't a shout of anger or fear. If you ask me how I figure a demon might yawn, I would tell you I don't have to guess. That sound, that was us waking something up. Something buried underneath all that coal. That 3 or so men working the treasure room got sucked under that big pile of black. That's when the cave-in started. It was the big chamber that went first. The one that me and my buddies were working. The hallway Sid had blasted out fell in on itself without so much as a groan to warn us. Most were able to run through the corridor in time and make it out. A couple were buried in the rubble, crushed flat as pancakes. Hooper Collins had his leg pinned underneath a boulder, which would be the depth of him, 19 or 20, I think. The guy had a pretty wife and no kids by her yet. Anyways, I noticed poor Hooper hollering and screaming. I did the best that I could to roll the rock off his leg. I wasn't even finished before Ralph screamed and pointed. A couple of the new recruits had rushed into that small room to avoid the boulders. Foolish mistake. Then, the screams I heard next were definitely human. I didn't watch. I didn't see. But you can't mistake the sound of flesh being yanked apart. So I gave up on Hooper and ran for the rest of the survivors. I still try to forget how he begged me not to run, the words that he used. I failed at that. I ran. Not far, just around a corner, and soon every healthy body was huddled around the cave-in. Desperately trying to dig out. It was pointless, but I jumped in anyway. What else could I do? When the screaming stopped, that's when the eating began. It must have gone on for half an hour, tearing, cracking. We all knew what the entree was, and each of us were digging faster. Eventually, of course, the panic wore off and we had time to think. What was back there? But most important, what would it do when it's done with its meal? And we all knew that we hadn't made progress escaping. West Virginians are just stubborn, I guess. As horrifying as the sounds were, the silence was far worse. The dinner was done. Hopefully, it was filling. Everyone stop. We need to figure this out, screamed Sid. He held up his light and we all faced him. Over a dozen of us were huddled, some crying, but all of us were shaking as if naked in a blizzard. We took a break from the digging and shut up for a moment. Everyone except for Rodney, the preacher's son, who fell to his knees and wouldn't stop praying no matter what the rest of us did. Rodney wasn't half as holy as his father, but at least one of us asking heaven for help couldn't have hurt. Finally, someone spoke. It was Ralph. He always had a clear head, even did a couple of years of college. He kept his voice lower than Sid had. It's gonna take days to dig ourselves out. That thing will get us if dehydration doesn't. And it's guarding the TNT, if that becomes our only option. We can post a watch, guards to make sure it doesn't come in here. It was Jesse who said it, trying to maintain his composure. Are you volunteering? You'll rather stand around and dig like the rest of us, said Ralph. Most of the water and lights are in the room with it, said Sid. We got it outnumbered. Can it die? Of course, said Ralph. I read a whole issue on undiscovered things in the National Geographic. Most life in the ocean is unknown, and there's all sorts of cave creatures that we never knew about. This thing is an animal, and animals can die. What does it eat? I asked. No one responded for a minute. Then Ralph nodded. The coal's energy too, made of carbon, just like living things. There's animals and critters out there that digest minerals. Now, I can't speak to the accuracy of this claim, or even my memory, but I wanted to think that Ralph was right. It was an animal. I'm not sure I believed it, but I wanted to. Around that time, Rodney stopped praying and shouted at us. It's no animal. It's no natural thing at all. It's a demon, drawn to our greed and wickedness. Rodney, please, said Jesse in a whisper. I think it was Sid that hit him in the back of the head. Not hard enough to knock him unconscious, but with plenty of force to knock him over and shut him up. Right away, Rashi went to go tend to Rod, giving Sid a sharp glare. No one else seemed to care. I don't know of many animals that can survive being hit with 7, 8 pickaxes, said someone whose name and face I can't recall. 9 by my count. It was Ralph. He didn't have to tell us the math, that there wasn't enough access for everyone. Rodney could barely walk, and Paul had a broken arm, which left me and 2 others to fight with rocks. Rashi was a little luckier. He kept this special blade on him everywhere he went. It was a long dagger with all sorts of ornaments. In the 50s, in Appalachia, a knife wouldn't bother anybody. Shoot, back then it wasn't uncommon for a guy to walk through town with a 6-shooter on his belt. None of us had a gun, of course, but I would have traded my rock for a good knife any day. The biggest threat here is gonna be friendly fire. Who was the fellow who said that? Can't get his name. I remember his stories, and he had been a sergeant in Korea. Damn. Fuck. Age is a hell of a thing. Anyways, the veteran advised us a bit. Watch where you swing. but don't stop hitting it until it stops moving. We drew up a battle plan with the sergeant's help, who would approach from what angle. The longer we waited, the more we feared we would lose our nerve. The creature hadn't made a sound for so long, only added to our worries. Was it planning something? Was it even smart enough to plan, as a unit? We rounded the bend and shined our lights the best we could. Half the standing lights were out, and out of all the remaining ones, most were knocked over. Little strips of white shined in random directions, like some sort of pattern, but unless it was hiding in the shadows, it was no creature. Blood and gut trails told a story, that the thing had drugged the dead into the pirate's chest to feast. Hooper's leg was still pinned underneath the boulder, but there was no sign of the rest of him. No one wanted to be first in line, so we crept towards what had to be this animal's real lair, weapons raised. About halfway there, something dropped onto us, or rather, onto Sarge. We hadn't even thought about an attack from above, so the whole plan was shot. Half of us ran, half attacked. I did a little bit of both. Before I go further, I'm gonna try my best to describe the creature. Just keep in mind, this was about 30 or 35 years ago. It moved faster than a rabbit, and I only ever got a real good look at it one time, at least with my own eyes. I can't count how many times I've seen it in dreams, but I suppose I saw it well enough for any man. But how tall I can't even guess, 'cause it was bent over with the twistiest damn pretzel of a spine I ever saw. At least 4 legs and as many arms, and at the end of each limb, a dozen fingers. Or maybe they were antennas, legs on a shrimp. Shit, I don't even know. I know it didn't have eyes. I do remember that. It only had one thing on its head, the mouth. A cross between the tail of an earwig and a crocodile's maw. But boy, was it skinny. Too skinny for how strong it was. And the flesh didn't look so tough. Translucent, almost worm-like. It had armor, like that of an insect, but the plates intersected more like the shell of a crawfish. Any more descriptions would be stretching the truth on my part. Whatever it was, an insect or a demon, it tore the sergeant apart in seconds. I couldn't bring myself to charge in close, so I threw my rock at its head. May as well have thrown a beach ball. Even the axe swings of these men were making cracks in it. I grabbed the pick that Sarge had dropped, or had his hand been ripped apart. Either way, I almost stepped on it when this thing ended up grabbing Ralph. I would like to think that I would have helped out if Rashi hadn't acted first. Rashi stuck that holy dagger of his into this monster easy as cutting cake. Your guess is as good as mine as why it worked. Maybe the dagger was better quality than the picks. Maybe something else. But the thing recoiled without making a sound and Ralph was free. Lucky stab or not, 2 more bodies were laying at this creature's feet, and there was nothing to do but run again. At least that's what everyone thought who wasn't Sid. In the midst of everything, he was able to find and light a stick of dynamite. "Keep your distance, boys," he shouted, running back to the fight. Don't get any romantic notion that Sid was a martyr. I knew the man as well as anybody, and he had no intention of dying. Just like he had no plan to slip on a pile of guts, twist his ankle too bad to stand, lose his grip on the explosive, and fail to catch the monster in the blast. All but 1 or 2 of us cleared the explosion, not counting Sid, who went out like everybody had guessed but in circumstances an oracle couldn't have predicted. At least we were alive. Our eyes and ears were none too happy, but the monster seemed worse off, skittering about in random directions, tripping over itself. A sound-driven creature, blinded by the noise. Maybe. We had to leave. Ralph spotted our way out, a chimney blown open by the blast. We would have to break the middle of the room, praying the monster would avoid us with its random shuffles. And it would take 2 men to reach the opening, one on the shoulders of the other. What choice did we have? We went for it. I recall Jesse weeping as he climbed onto my back, and for a moment, I judged him for it, until I realized that I was crying too. To his credit, Jesse felt a ledge once through the opening, and did his best to pull the rest of us up. Halfway through, Jesse and Rashi and a couple others having reached safety, this creature grabbed somebody. Matthew Stewart, I believe. No one watched them die, and no one tried to help them. I confess feeling a bit of relief, thinking the catch will distract it long enough for us to climb. A sinful thought, sure, but I committed much worse. 8 or 9 of us were left, and of all of those, only 2 of us had lights. We shined them upwards, and would you believe that we couldn't even see the roof? I don't know the chances of that. A passage appearing right above us, straight shot to the surface. Praise Jesus, we've been delivered, said Rodney. No one could really argue the point. We climbed, I'm not sure for how long. It was tiring work, but adrenaline's a powerful thing. At first, we braced our backs to one wall and used our legs along the opposite. Then it turned into more like a steep slope that we had to scale with our hands. A few outcroppings gave us chances to rest. Sometimes, the mouth would widen, and we could offer support to the weaker man. Others, it would narrow, and we would have to squeeze through one at a time. And in one of those cases, we lost another man. A wide frame can be a blessing or a curse in a mine, and Leon was just too stout to fit. Even with someone pushing from under and pulling from above, it didn't take long until Leon was wedged so tight, he couldn't even go back down. He would have needed to break his shoulders to move. Ralph offered to do just that. Yank his arms out of their sockets, that is. And keep on climbing how? Liam asked. Then, still stuck, the man pulled out a pocket knife and cut his own throat. Rodney screamed, and all I could think was how fortunate I was to be above him rather than below. It did take breaking his arms to dislodge his corpse. He actually didn't mind. Just fell 10 feet before sticking someplace else. There'll be time to pray for his soul later. We kept on for as long as we could, which wasn't long. No, a few minutes later, and we came across the worst thing any of us had ever seen, not counting this creature. The ceiling. One of the lights went out. It can't be, Rodney whispered. We're trapped. The chances of coming out to the surface were always slim, said Ralph, with no emotion in his voice. I just wish we had a few cigarettes to share. What time is it? Most likely dark by now, said Ralph. Then they're gonna send somebody. Where Jesse's confidence came from, I can't say, but I did envy it. Maybe there's already a rescue party digging through the rubble. We'll be home by morning. Is that what you want, Jesse? It was Ralph. All of our friends and fathers getting themselves killed. No, of course not. I just mean, shut up, said Ralph. And he did. No one said much of anything for the next hour. A few sobs, even a couple grim chuckles. I assumed that most of us accepted what was going to happen. A small part of me held out hope for rescue. There was no way to warn the rescuers, even if anyone was coming. Nothing to do at all but wait and make peace with our Creator. Then, the last light went out. I doubt you'll ever experience a darkness like that. Sure, maybe you experienced pitch black. Maybe you've been underground. But I'm talking about the kind of dark that fills your insides, where even a pair of eyes 3 inches from yours don't glow. The kind dark so deep you know you won't ever see light again. The little room we had sat ourselves in somehow started feeling a lot smaller all of a sudden, and the rock scraping my back became harder to ignore. There's no one on this earth that would wish this sort of death upon them. Being buried alive, I would have traded anything just to stretch my arms out. In a way, it was almost like drowning. I nearly drowned once, when I was 12. I was trying to impress this girl by swimming across a lake. It was fun, at first, until it hit me like a baseball bat how much water was between my feet and the lake's floor. I remember clearly how oppressive all that water felt as my head was starting to sink under it. An older girl had saved me. Dying underground was similar, all the stone above and below me for who knows how far. But no 11th grader was coming this time. Of all the things to reach out in mercy, it was the moon, a little stream of blue light above our heads. It took our eyes a bit to adjust and even make the light out. I thought I was hallucinating, until Jesse shrieked in joy. The chimney did go all the way to the surface, but only a tiny slit, not near enough to scurry up. I can do it, Rashi said. The hell you can, snapped Ralph. Rashi placed a hand on his cheek. I can do it. Have faith. Rashi took off his boots and his jacket, spit on his palms and steeled himself. Rashi, I said. I also have faith. I'll be back, he said. And with a whole bunch of people. And guns, said Ralph. Rashi smiled. And guns. Before he left, he stopped for a second. I thought he was second guessing himself. Then he handed me his knife. I thought your religion said you always had to carry this. Rashi just laughed. We couldn't see him climb. He blocked out the light, but we listened for minutes as he wiggled through the impossible small opening. At some point, his grunt stopped, and I had fear he suffocated himself. But then he shouted down to us, I made it. I'll be back soon. There still wasn't much conversation as we waited, but at least it no longer felt like drowning. Thank you, Father. Thank you. I'm done with drinking. I'm done with gambling. I'll never stray from my wife again. Rodney was praying. Speak for yourself, said a guy I can't remember. First thing I'm doing when we get out of this is having a cold beer. Fuck it, make that 3. A few of us laughed. A lot louder than the joke was funny. But that's when I heard it. Shh, I said, and everyone clammed up quick. The air wasn't quiet. We could all hear it. It was Liam's flesh. It was tearing, and then being swallowed. Fuck, said Rodney. We've been delivered. Why is it back? Rashi's coming with guns, said Jesse. He'll make it back fast. It took that thing a while to eat the poor fellas last time. We have time. It had more than one body to eat last time, said Ralph. What if it finishes before Rashi returns? I'm not sure if I thought of it on my own, or if it's what Ralph was trying to imply, but a way to buy us a few precious minutes crossed my mind. I didn't voice the plan though. It was just too damn messed up. Rodney voiced it for me. An offering, he said. That thing down there, it's a devil, a demonic spirit. We don't know that, said Ralph. Rodney continued. It's a demon if there ever was one. Demons are drawn to the wickedness. Someone brought it here, and only an offering will satisfy it. An evil offering for an evil thing. Rod, what are you trying to say? Asked Jesse. No one answered for a moment, but the silence was broken by a bone that was cracking. Marrow being sucked. This creature was wrapping up his meal. Maybe you're right, Rod, said Ralph. Maybe this devil has wanted a sacrifice all along. Come on, Ralph. You don't believe in that sort of superstition, said Jesse. I'm not sure what I believe anymore, Jesse, but I know that thing is hungry, and I got a pretty strong notion who the most wicked man among us is. He comes from a long line of wicked folks. The next minute or two is a blur, most likely because I try to block it out, but like mostly everything I tried in my life, I didn't do it well enough. Please understand, I don't remember laying a finger on Jesse. Cross my heart and swear on my children. The way I remember it, I stood back and was just looking. Even tried to reason with Ralph and the others to leave Jesse be. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, maybe 100,000, and I still don't remember myself killing somebody. But maybe the mind is more powerful than the soul, able to change memories that are too horrible to recall. Because one thing I do remember are my knuckles being stained in blood, half mine and half his. I remember looking at that, flat as a washboard face, the punches of a dozen men having removed any evidence of Jesse's high cheekbones and pointy nose. I remember how he looked white as marble in the moonlight. I remember his screams and demanding why, and I remember when those words were replaced by pitiful gargles, much worse than the creature itself. It's that memory which still haunts me. I can forget about it most days, but I remember it every night. Whiskey does help, a little, and that's how you know if the old timer telling you the story was actually there. That's how you can be sure. Before we tossed the body down the hole, we nodded to each other in a silent pact, not to tell anybody about what happened. We weren't even supposed to talk about it with each other. That was the unspoken vow. So if somebody knows about Jesse, they were there. No mistake. I have often wondered if I could have stopped it. I knew it was wrong, and I remember protesting some. I had the dagger, and I knew it didn't care for loud sounds. Could be if I was braver, I could have used the knife and the knowledge to fight the monster off. But if I stood in the way of this mob, they most likely would have killed us both. However you cut it, I was a coward. I'm a coward. Why did Rashi have to leave for help? He wouldn't have let it happen. Rashi was a good man. He made good on his word too. But the guns proved unnecessary. The rescue party never came across the creature, coming straight back to the crag and digging us out. I'm guessing this creature left when it felt so many people around. But the creature was no longer in the mine when the townsfolk went back to recover what little was left of the bodies. Most of the survivors skipped town, moving with barely a goodbye to the friends and relatives they grew up with. One came back, eventually, but the rest I never saw again. With the biggest mine shut down, there was less work. The owner of the mines talked about reopening a time or two. Most of the workers were willing to go on strike if he did. I had switched to another trade by then. I spent the next 20 years in lumber, but that mine is still buried. The way I hear it, kids go up there sometimes to see who's brave enough to hike in and touch the big cursed rock pile. Parents say it's dangerous because it can cave in. Grandparents say it's dangerous too, but for different reasons. It's still out there, somewhere. Maybe it found another cave to call home. Or maybe it's never much like being underground and lives in some forest, in the woods now. Before we came along, I'm guessing it was trapped, and maybe we let it loose into the world. I guess I'll never know. Not sure that I want to. I'll be dead soon, in a box. Maybe Rashi had the right of it. Buried things have a tendency not to stay buried. If it wouldn't cause an uproar at the church. Funny, why should I even care? Stepping inside a building less than 100 times, and those were just for weddings, funerals, and Easter Sundays, there would be a scandal all the same. I never did make trouble alive. I figured no use in starting after I die. Telling you the story, the whole story, is some sort of penance. People should know what's out there in the dark, as much as they should know what we did. On Judgment Day, when I have to look Jesse in the eye and give account for how I lived, the things I done, at least I can say I told it like it happened, not until the end. So if the good judge sees that it's fitting to condemn me, well, I guess I can't protest all too much. Maybe, in whatever hell I'm heading for, I'll meet the creature again. A lot of thinking and a couple of drinks later, I'm finally going to share some of my experiences. The area where I worked was incredibly isolated, surrounded by dense forest and rugged wilderness. I was a ranger up there. It was in the late 1990s. The rules and regulations can feel distant. You'll see what I mean by this later on. We drive around on an ATV, making sure the wildlife was safe and occasionally dealing with poachers. My job mainly involved ensuring the safety of the deer population and handling other wildlife management jobs. My only colleague was a guy that I'm gonna call Peter. Short and easy to remember. Peter was your typical backwoods guy, a bit of a wild man who brewed his own moonshine and smoked like a chimney. He had been my best friend for several years and always had my back, no matter what we faced out there in the woods. The pay for the job wasn't great, but it came with perks that made it worth it. We had no boss breathing down our necks and we could basically go camping, get wasted, and call it a getaway. In the midst of everything, we were still able to arrest some people and put some real poachers behind bars. However, sometimes we got calls that made us actually do some work, hard work at that. If people spotted sick animals, it was up to us to go out there and make sure they didn't spread disease. If an animal showed aggressive behavior that might endanger locals, we had to make sure it was put down. We had friends at a local vet who would run blood samples if we suspected rabies or something similar. One day, Peter and I got a call from some pretty spooked locals. They told us that some boys had gone hunting a couple of days ago, but none of them had returned. They all believed the boys had been killed by bears or a wolf. Great, now we had to venture out in the wilderness to deal with potentially aggressive carnivores. The locals pointed us in the general direction, and we took off on our ATVs. We drove around the area for about 3 hours when we found an abandoned campsite. It was evident that the camp had been trashed by something, most likely a bear by the looks of it. The boys had left camp in a hurry, not even taking their rifles with them. From there, we went out on foot with our guns drawn, just in case. We found the first body a few meters away from the camp. He was lying on his stomach with several deep wounds in his back. What struck us as weird was that there were deep puncture wounds, which we had never seen before in a bear or a wolf attack. There was also a clear path, indicating where the other boys had fled. We found 2 more boys in the same small area, both lying dead with similar marks. One of them had been gutted. Peter was visibly shaken by the scene and just kept shaking his head in disbelief. According to the locals, there were supposed to be 4 boys out there, so we were still missing 1. We both nearly jumped out of our skins when we heard something rustling through the brush towards us. We aimed at the commotion and waited for it to reveal itself before we shot. I almost dropped my rifle when it came from the dense bushes. It was a red stag, with the mangled remains of the boy stuck in its antlers. The stag was struggling to keep its balance under the weight of the boy, but it was still aggressive towards us, as if it was about to charge at us. Peter was the first to snap out of the shock and started lighting the thing up. After further inspection, we noticed that its antlers were worn down and broken. It had put an excessive amount of force behind each of its charges, breaking its antlers on the poor boys. The reason the last boy was stuck in its antlers was because the damn thing had practically torn through his rib cage. We couldn't separate the boy from the antlers, so we had to bring the head of the deer with us. It was one of the most screwed up rides home, with several bodies tied to the back of our ATVs. Pretty disturbing, something I never thought I would be doing. The local police were pretty angry at us, seeing that we had moved bodies from a potential crime scene, but they let us off easy, since the killer was literally embedded in one of the victims. Seeing the heartbroken parents of those boys still haunts me to this day. That night, Peter and I hung out, mostly because I was still really spooked. Man, that stuff wasn't natural, he said at one point. Deer can be aggressive and defend themselves, but I know this one was hunting those boys, and it killed them all as well. They don't fucking do that. And that time was the first time I caught a glimpse of the spooky stuff that goes on out there. In the following years, I saw some deeply insane stuff that only Peter and I know about. I'm going to share some of these stories with you, and hopefully you will believe me and understand why I'm scared every time that I see a deer. About once or twice a month, we had to go on excursions into the wilderness to look for signs of poachers, sick animals, and other stuff like that. One time, we decided to drive out to a fairly secluded area because there were rumors of some potential poaching. It was a very long drive, so we always kind of put it off until the last minute, praying that the poachers would just get mauled by bears so we wouldn't have to make the long journey up there. Some of these places would take about 2, 3, or 4 hours to get there, and this time it took about 2 hours before the terrain became too difficult for even the ATVs to handle. We had to walk the rest of the way, which meant that we had to camp out overnight. Those are the free camping experiences that I told you about. Camping out was a norm for us, but we were further away from anything than I had ever been before, and the previous incident was still haunting my mind. Peter offered me some liquor to ease my worries, but there was no way that I wanted to be drinking, especially if we got attacked by some demonic deer again. The night went by without incident, but I still didn't get enough sleep. We continued our trek towards the supposed poacher hotspot. We arrived and looked around, but we found nothing. There didn't even seem to be any sign of human activity anywhere in the area. Fucking rumors, Peter said to himself as he shook his head in frustration. Normally, we would be happy to find nothing, but this time we were just exhausted and cranky. We were then startled by a loud echo through the forest. What the fuck was that? Peter pulled out his rifle and aimed where the noise was coming from. Even though it went against our instincts, we had to go investigate it. We got to a small ridge that overlooked the clearing. In the middle of the clearing, a group of 5 stags were huddled together, their heads down, as if they were grazing. We noticed that they all seemed to make sudden violent jerking motions, like they were trying to gore the ground with their antlers. Peter fired a shot into the air to make them scatter, and they didn't move. If you have any basic knowledge of wildlife, you will know that any sudden loud noise will make just about any animal take off running. We fired a couple more shots into the air, but they just didn't react. Without thinking, we decided to calmly approach them to get a better look at what they were doing. As we got close, we were met with this nasty stench of rot. "Is that a bear?" Peter gestured to the ground in front of the stags. To our surprise, there was a large adult black bear. Its body was starting to decompose, which means that it was dead for about 4 or 5 days. The stags were making all sorts of noises and groaning as they continuously gored the carcass over and over again. They looked exhausted and malnourished. The bear's body was completely ripped apart except for its head, which they, for some reason, had left completely alone. We stood frozen to the ground as we watched this horrible scene unfold. How were they able to take down a bear? How is that even possible? I asked Peter. He just shook his head in disbelief as he raised his rifle and shot one of the stags. He later explained that he wanted a blood sample. As soon as the stag fell to the ground, all the others stopped what they were doing, and they just turned to look at us. They were covered in rotting blood and chunks of meat. They didn't show any aggressive behavior. They just stared at us, not flinching, nor blinking. Peter changed his mind about the blood sample at this point, and just slowly started backing away. I followed him and raised my rifle, just in case. We reached the ridge. They resumed their eating once again, not even paying attention to us. We were so done at this point that we didn't even set up camp that night. We just kept hiking at a brisk pace until we got to our ATVs. None of us said a word during the entire ride home, except for the occasional F word. That incident really did something to Peter. It did take him a couple of weeks before he went with me into the forest again. He was completely convinced that the stags were being manipulated by a witch or something, which I'm not really sure of. I don't really believe in witches and all that. I just believe that nature is a lot more screwed up than we realize. We've been away from untamed nature for so long, living in our towns and cities, that we forget how scary and unpredictable nature can be, especially when it comes to all sorts of animals living in the deep woods. But still, there was something just off about those stags, and I still don't have an explanation. One day, we got a call from the local police. An old man who lived by himself in a remote cabin hadn't been seen in a while. They wanted us to take them to the cabin since they weren't used to the terrain, being more accustomed to paved streets than the rough wilderness. We drove them out to the cabin and parked a few meters from the front door. It was pretty clear that something happened. The door was completely knocked off its hinges, and the cabin was empty. The officers then asked us to assist them in their search, and we agreed. The initial theory was that he had been taken by a bear, which seemed plausible considering the door's condition. We spread out and followed whatever trails we could find. It only took about half an hour before one of the officers called something in. He sounded a little shaken, but he gave us detailed directions to where he was. He didn't tell us what he had found. He just said, "You'll want to see this for yourselves." When we got to where he was, it wasn't clear what he had found since nothing looked out of place. No broken branches, no trail, nothing. He just pointed up to a long tree in front of him. Slung over one of the higher branches was a fresh deer carcass. Now this was weird, strange, but we didn't see what this had to do with the case. Then we noticed something even stranger further up the tree. There was a black bear carcass. Something had killed a bear and then placed it in the tree. I knew that leopards and other big cats did this later for consumption, but there were no big cats where this took place. The officers looked pretty uneasy, taking nervous glances over their shoulders. We stayed as a group after that. Obviously, we still searched for another couple of hours before we called it. On our way back, we once again passed a tree, and I kid you not, the deer was gone, leaving only some bloody branches behind. We picked up the pace and made our way back out of there without looking back, and, well, we never did find the body. There was a winter where we had a pretty horrible incident. The winters up here can be brutal, especially with heavy snow and temperatures dropping to the negatives. If someone goes missing, they're immediately presumed dead, because it's impossible to maintain your core temperature for long without proper gear. And when it's someone's kid who goes missing, it's even more heartbreaking. The police once again requested our assistance because a mother had reported her 6-year-old daughter missing. The thought of spending hours in the cold wasn't appealing, but we couldn't possibly turn a blind eye to a missing child. The mother had let her children play outside when one of them suddenly ran towards the tree line. They had been out there for some time, calling her name, but they just couldn't find her. That's when they called the police, which they ended up calling us. By the time we arrived at the area, she had been missing for about 2 hours. We followed a trail that we suspected were her tracks, which actually went far longer than what a kid should be able to run, at least at that age. But the strange thing is that the trail just stopped. There was no sidestepping, no scuffling, no signs of anything. It was like she just disappeared on the spot. We examined the tracks to see if she had backtracked or something, but there were no clear signs of any double prints. Peter was visibly upset and frustrated. We then asked the other kids why she started running into the forest, but they had no clear answer. They claimed that she just started running without any warning. The kids were shaking and crying, so we ended up asking the mother to return to their home while we kept looking. An officer followed them back to their house to make sure they felt safe. About 15 minutes later, one of the officers got a call on the radio. We could hear the sound of the mother crying in the background. They had found the girl. She was just sitting on the step of their back door. She was dead and frozen solid. She was only wearing a regular jacket and jeans. Considering that she was supposed to play outside for some time, the mother had locked the doors before they left because she didn't want anybody going inside, possibly to rob anything while they were away. To this day, I still tear up when I think about it, but I still have many unanswered questions about what happened. The obvious answer is that she went back home and then froze to death while she couldn't get inside. But I still think there's more to it. If she had ran back, how is it that none of her siblings or her mom noticed her? Why didn't she respond to their calls? How did she run back without leaving any tracks? How was she almost frozen solid even though she was only missing for 2 hours? Sorry, 4 hours. None of the neighbors saw anything strange, so there was nothing to investigate. The mom, unfortunately, blamed herself and became an alcoholic. I still think about the incident every day, and for some reason, it just hit harder than the 4 boys who had been mauled to death. After what happened to me all those years ago, the one place in the whole world that still rattles my body and sends chills up my spine happens to be my grandmother's farm. When my parents and I would go visit my grandma's one-story farm every 3 years, I was put in the same room. The room and all its velvet blankets and puffy pillows had a cozy vibe to it, along with the rest of the house. But at nighttime, the large window in front of the bed painted a picture of the unsettling wilderness outside, which wouldn't help with my imagination. And ever since I was 6, my brain terrified me with that imagination, using vivid nightmares, sleep paralysis, and everything else in between. So naturally, my fear of the window was always there. You see, most kids have monsters underneath their beds or in their closets. But at my grandma's house, there was something that lurked outside that window. The first time I ever saw it was at 2 in the morning. The creature, which I assumed was just in my head and I was imagining, was at the edge of the woods staring at the window. It was a goat, standing on 2 legs. Its body had the shape of a human, and its claws dangling around its thighs. I slammed my eyes shut and covered myself with my soft blanket, waiting for the thing to evaporate from my imagination. As you can guess, I was tired by the time I woke up. That morning, when my parents were at the town's Walmart, and I was trying to forget last night's experience, I had a pleasant conversation with Grandma. We loved to talk, and we had a special type of chemistry that transcended our generational differences. Curious about her farm, I wanted to know about all her animals. "Well, we have all sorts of animals," she said with a grin. "I have chickens, peacocks, sheep, hogs, ducks, horses, ponies. I have just about any animal on this farm, besides any kind of goat." "You said any goat?" I said, recalling the form outside my window. "Why don't you like any goats? Can't you milk them and make cheese?" Grandma's face darkened, and she stroked her fingers through her gray hair as her eyes stared into space. "Well, according to some people, after God created sheep, the devil, in an effort to desecrate God's sheep, created different kinds of goats. Angry after the devil disgraced his sheep, created a wolf to eat the goats. In a massive tantrum of rage, the devil bit the tails of the goats, marking them as an unholy animal. Then, with a quizzical and hard to decipher face, she said, 'I thought you would have seen it by now. Haven't you?' I knew what she was talking about right away, and it seemed I would burst into a fit of scared shrieking and crying at the thought of my grandmother confirming the thing outside my window was actually real. I tried to rationalize the situation, thinking the goat-like creature was just a dream, and that what my grandma said was unrelated. But at the sight of my distress, my grandmother destroyed that idea with the opening of her mouth. "It won't hurt you if you stay inside at night, so there's nothing to worry about." It was supposed to be a comforting statement, but her actually confirming this made it worse. Grandma pretended to forget the conversation, never speaking of it for the rest of the trip. When the night came, I decided to sleep in my parents' bedroom, where the bed faced away from the window, but I swear I heard a glassy tapping from behind me. Lucky for us, my parents and I left the farm the next day, leaving behind the forest and fields of Maryland. But 3 years after this initial incident, after blocking the creature from my memory, I saw it a second time at 11 o'clock at night. I was half asleep on Grandma's couch to the sound of the TV when a reporter shouting, "Breaking news." My eyes initially darting around the room and my brain adjusting to consciousness. I was in shock as I saw the creature hunched over in front of the living room window. The half goat sprang from the window and ran into the distance on its 2 legs. I slapped myself. Snap out of it. But nothing could stop the memories of the creature and what Grandma had said about it. I paced around the room with adrenaline flooding my body, wanting to flee, but not knowing where to go. With a few sleeping pills, however, I willed myself to sleep with the living room curtains drawn. The morning after, I found a note on the kitchen table. My parents were shopping, and Grandma was at a doctor's appointment. I was alone in the house, and me wanting to find out what was going on, I plugged in my grandmother's outdated Macintosh for a bit of research. "Half goat, half man," I typed, which brought up a Wikipedia page on different kinds of cryptids. Not exactly what I was looking for. Goat creature in Maryland, I corrected. And as soon as I hit search, Google presented me with another Wikipedia page. This one on a creature known as the Goatman of Maryland. This was exactly what I was looking for. The Goatman of Maryland is a legendary half-goat, half-human creature that has the head and the hind of a goat and the body of a human. The rest of the page went on to explain how the locals suspect the Goatman is either a failed gene-mixing science experiment or a demonic spawn of the devil, as Grandma had said. For the rest of the week, I saw it every single night. Whenever I was trying to fall asleep in my room, it would be staggering around the clearing outside my window. If I was watching TV late at night, the Goatman would be gazing at the screen from the living room window. And on the last day, when I was feeding Grandma's peacocks in the evening, she came to bring me inside after she saw it approaching the farm. By the end of the second visit, seeing the Goatman was something normal. And with the occasional reminder from Grandma, I respected it and its personal space. 3 years later, however, my third visit to Grandma's ranch showed me what happened when you didn't honor the Goatman's boundaries. On the local news, there was one headline stirring up the rustic community: 10 professional boar hunters killed in animal attack. My parents thought it was horrible, but Grandma and I shot each other looks of shared knowledge. The next morning, the paper arrived at the farm, where the hunting tragedy made the front page. The night before, police found 10 hunters mutilated to death by a wild animal. The hunters' AR-15 magazines were completely full upon dying, and local authorities are stumped as to how none of them could have gotten a single shot off. My parents, who had no knowledge of the Goatman, had no idea what caused the attack, and were as ignorant as the rest of the investigators. So I had to ask Grandma why my parents hadn't seen it yet. Well, she said, the creature only appears to those he finds interesting. You have to understand it can change its views on people. I have these scars from when I was a little girl, but after it got used to me, it stopped. My parents, who were your great-grandparents, were demoted to the low end of the thing's opinions. Their passing and my survival go-to show how unpredictable it can be. I was shaking, even more freaked out by that. The thing had attacked Grandma when she was young, and it seemed like the Goatman could change its opinion of me in the blink of an eye. It almost seemed like I had developed something with the creature during my last visit by seeing it all the time and watching TV with it. And not once did I ever go outside at night when it was in charge of the farm. I respected it. Could it really forget all that? Or was I reading into Grandma's statements more than I should have? In the visits following that year, I read some news articles about mutilated hikers, missing campers, and farm animals turning up dead. The Goatman was getting more aggressive. One time, the creature looked right into my soul with its black, empty eyes, and for the first time since my initial viewing of it, my body gave to the most feared dread I had ever felt. The more violent the news stories became, the more I felt that the goat was getting more aggressive. Grandma even ended up buying more curtains for the house, acquired a better lock for the door, and actually went to a shooting range to learn how to use a shotgun. It came to the point where I was trying to make peace with the creature by leaving pig food in the field for it to eat, but instead, it snatched one of the hogs from the pig pen and ran into the woods. On the last day of the visit, I woke up to the sound of ear-splitting banging on the front door. Grandma was gripping her new shotgun, and with my dad holding a baseball bat, they waited for the intruder to burst through the door. Yet the banging subsided after a few minutes, the chirping and croaking of insects and frogs replacing it within the hour. After that incident, we didn't visit the ranch for 5 years, and I was nearing the end of my high school by then. My parents actually encouraged Grandma to move out of the house in light of people in her town being discovered murdered in their own homes. But being the stubborn grandma she was, she decided to go against it. Besides, she thought she knew how fortified her farm was. A few weeks ago, we returned to that awful farm, finding barbed wire on the outskirts of the field. There were fewer animals now, and I swear some of the surviving pigs had faded scars on their bodies from scratches, stabs, and bites not even the most vicious bear could manage. I was more jittery than I ever been in my life, and it was all because I knew that goat man was scheming someone in the deep woods, sensing that I had arrived on its land. I spoke with Grandma, who showed me a newspaper talking about how the FBI was getting involved in the murder investigations here, and that the criminal would be behind bars soon. However, as Grandma told me, other farmers around town were speaking about how the FBI's true motive was to cover up the real culprit. When we were having dinner, I poked at my food, ignoring the discourse my family was having. Afterwards, I went to my room and made sure the door was shut before I hopped into bed and waited. After hours of anticipating, in the field beyond my window, the monster dragged the bloody body of a peaceful doe into view. The goat man ripped the deer's intestines out and bit into the insides with its evil-loving fangs, spilling blood onto the moonlit ground. It turned its head to face my direction, hurling a piece of deer at the window. I jerked as blood splattered against the pane like a sheet of rain, startling me to full awareness. Me rushing from my bed to get a closer look at the field, I saw the goatman had left behind the body of a deer. It was mocking me, and I was sure of it. I settled back into bed with the blood sliding down the window, wrapping myself in my blanket as if it was armor, and getting ready for whatever might happen next. I have no idea how, but I drifted asleep with a piece of the creature's latest meal stuck to my window. That was when I had the worst nightmare any human mind could produce. It was a once-in-a-lifetime dream of horror, where the creature had crept into my room and was slicing chunks of muscle from my limbs and carving blocks of flesh out of my torso with its claws, choking me with its horns. The pain was real, and I smelled the rotten stench of the creature's dirt-matted fur. It was as if my mind was nagging at me and screaming at the top of its lungs for me to wake up. So I did. Soaked in sweat, I sent my eyes flying open, gasping like I was on the edge of dying. As I scrambled to see any sign of the goatman's presence outside, I panicked upon seeing several inconsistencies with how the room was when I went to sleep. Now, the door was wide open, and something had smeared deer blood on the inside of the window, and that's when the tapping reached my ears. Not from the window, but from my bed frame. 2 furry hands slumped over the frame, claws dripping blood onto the sheets. I froze, the form getting to its feet and tilting its head as it examined me. Too weak to fight and too shocked to run, I waited to die. But to my surprise, instead of slashing my belly, the goatman spoke.
"You be not right,"
it said before crouching on all fours and scurrying and walking out of the house. When the police arrived, They found the lifeless body of Grandma, who had died of a heart attack. After that, the FBI showed up, erasing all evidence of forced entry and the strange deer blood being inside the house. With me sobbing and my parents crying, Dad decided to get us a hotel, and I actually rejoiced at the fact that our room was on the 3rd floor. I shed a few tears and had a good rest, the thought of what the creature had said zipping through my mind. That was 2 weeks ago, and until now, I believe I would never have to see that farm for the rest of my life. But as it turns out, my grandmother had left the farm to me. Not only that, she clearly stated in her will that I should also inherit her shotgun. I don't want to go back there, but because she died, I feel a weight of guilt dragging me down. My heart desires for me to follow her last wishes, and they involve going back to Maryland with her gun. But first, I'm gonna try to get a priest to bless the farm, or an old American native elder to perform a smudging ritual. Even though I'm skeptical about those ideas working, I don't know when I'll have an update. I just know it has to be soon, or else. This story was told to me by one of my good friends, who has Navajo background on her father's side. It happened several years ago when she was spending the last 2 weeks of summer visiting relatives on a reservation in New Mexico, and is by far one of the creepiest things I ever heard. My friend Jessie was 12 at the time and playing outside with her cousins. They were tossing a frisbee around, and one of the younger kids threw it too hard. It flew over the fence and was swallowed up by a small grove of oak trees. Jessie, being the eldest, went to retrieve it, leaving her 11-year-old cousin Ellie in charge until she got back. The sun was setting, lighting up the sky in brilliant shades of orange as Jessie made her way over to the grove. After some poking around, she found the frisbee caught in one of the tree's branches. As she climbed, she began to sing an old Navajo song, but stopped singing when her body suddenly went cold. That's exactly how Jessie described it to me. Cold, as if she'd been dunked in ice water. You know that annoying scary story cliche of feeling like you're being watched? Well, it's only cliche because it's true. Jessie could feel a pair of eyes following her, even when she looked around her and saw nothing. Seriously creeped out, she grabbed the frisbee and ran back to her grandmother's house, just in time to see the old woman step into the porch and call for the kids to come inside. However, the true horror didn't start until several hours later. Jessie, her cousin Ellie, and Ellie's little sister Clara were asleep in their grandmother's guest room when Jessie woke up to the strangest sound she had ever heard. She described it to me as a cross between radio static and the noise an old movie reel makes. At first, it sounded distant, but after a minute or two, Jessie realized it was getting closer. Beside her, Ellie rolled over and said, "What is that?" "I don't know," Jessie whispered. They waited, holding their collective breath. By now, the sound was right outside the window, and that's when Jessie realized it was singing. At this point in her retelling of the story, Jessie went white and began glancing over her shoulder. She told me the song was the exact same one she had been singing in the tree grove earlier. It sounded so wrong, she said, rubbing her arms as if a cold breeze had rushed by her. "Remember, when we listened to that clip of the very first recording of a human voice, how weird it sounded. When I nodded, Jesse added, "It was like that, but a little clearer." Somehow, that made it even worse. Jesse and Ellie were both terrified, while Clara, unaware, slept on. Through the thin blue curtain over the window, they could see the dark shadow of something peering in at them. To this day, Jessie can't explain what motivated her to get up and see for herself, especially because she was scared shitless. Ignoring Ellie's protest, she slid out of bed and walked across the room on shaky legs. As soon as she drew back the curtain, she regretted her choice. Staring back at her was the most terrifying creature she had ever seen. It had the head of a deer, with antlers like dead tree branches, and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the faint silver moonlight. It had a scrawny humanoid body, with abnormally long arms and legs, and as Jessie stood there, caught in its hideous gaze, it raised a hand and scratched at the window with a horrible screeching sound that made Jessie's skin crawl. It was Ellie's scream that jolted Jessie out of her terrified state. She stumbled back from the window and landed on the carpet floor. Clara woke up and began screaming too. Then their grandmother ran in and turned on the light. The thing at the window had vanished, leaving behind 3 long scratches in the glass, and the whole family terrified. Jessie's grandmother was able to calm down the hysterical children enough so they could tell her what happened. As she listened, her face became pale. She hustled the girls downstairs to the living room and made up a bed for them on the couch. She then sat by them all night, and whenever one of them asked her what was going on, the old woman simply shook her head. Needless to say, Jessie and her cousin didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jessie's grandmother announced that everyone was to stay inside that day, no arguments. She looked so shaken that nobody dared to protest. Around noon, she called for a medicine woman to come and bless the house. Later, after the woman left, Jessie merged into the kitchen where her grandmother was loading the dishwasher. "Tell me what that thing was," she said bluntly. Her grandmother sighed and motioned for Jessie to sit down. "You have heard the legend of Skinwalkers?" "Yes." Jessie frowned and nodded, vaguely recalling the story. "So that was a Skinwalker?" Her grandmother nodded. "Yes." "Grandma," said Jessie at a light dawn, "I think it overheard me singing in the tree grove yesterday." Her grandmother's dark eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because it was singing that same song, you know, the song that you used to sing to me when I was little." Her grandmother was silent for a long time before whispering, "You're a very lucky person, but luck has its limits. From now on, you must be more careful." The look in the old woman's eyes as she spoke those words still haunts Jessie to this day. As I said earlier, that was years ago, 7 to be specific. Jessie has returned to the REZ many times actually, each without incident, but she has never set foot in that tree grove again, and most likely never will. Jessie's grandmother died this past March at the age of 87, and Jessie later moved in with her auntie for the summer so she could help clean up the old house, which the family was going to rent out. She had been there for about a week when I went down there to visit her. On my first night, we sat on the porch and drank some beers, and I found my eyes drifting towards the tree grove. "So that's where it all happened?" Jessie shuddered and nodded. "Yeah, tomorrow I'm taking you to the medicine woman and have her bless you." "Is that actually necessary?" The look Jessie gave me nearly turned me to stone. "You think nothing will happen to you because you're white, but when you're in Navajo land, you're in Skinwalker land. Take caution." I nodded. That night, I swore I heard radio static outside the house. When I brought it up to Jessie the next morning, she didn't speak, but grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the medicine woman, where I was blessed. Nothing happened for the rest of the trip, and I went back to the city. I didn't post this here with the intention of teaching a moral, but I suppose if there is something to be learned from the story of the singing Skinwalker, it's that there are things out there we can't explain. The look in Jessie's eyes when she recounted her experience and told me everything I need to know, what she saw, truly horrified her. And all I can say is, I'm grateful I didn't have to go through it myself. I wanted to share something that I experienced as a child. I'm somewhat a believer of the paranormal, but the analytical rational side of me always begs to differ slightly. This story is also very true. My grandmother isn't one to play around, especially about something like this. I'm not sure if you all will believe me, but I do want to say that this absolutely scared the crap out of me, and still actually does. So I thought I would share. I apologize in advance if I don't format my story correctly, or isn't as eloquent as other stories. I was about 10 or 11 years old at the time of this story. My mom wasn't home. I can't remember exactly where she was, but it was just me and my grandma on this one night. It was around this age that I had discovered whistling, how to do it well, and I found myself doing it quite often. At nighttime though, my grandma didn't like me doing it, and kept telling me not to whistle at night, and how it wasn't good. Despite her countless warnings, I just couldn't stop. It was a bad habit that I found myself doing without even thinking. So I'm not sure if you guys know already, but apparently whistling at night is really bad. My grandmother said that when you whistle at night, it's basically an invitation for the spirits to come to your house, or something like that, around that definition. Now, my grandmother is a firm believer of the paranormal. She has experienced a lot of stuff, but being young, I obviously didn't know that. Just as a side note, she has this thing with mirrors at night, and avoids them. It's really bad apparently. I'm pretty sure it stems from a deep cultural belief, one of which I have almost no knowledge of, as I was born in a different country, and so I'm not subjected to her cultural beliefs. After the whistling incident, and realizing my grandmother doesn't do certain things, for no reason, I developed a fear of mirrors, even though I didn't really know why. I know it's kinda stupid. I might ask her one day. Moving on. Being the dickhead that I was at the time, I didn't listen, most likely due to the fact that I didn't really believe that such a thing was possible. This night was no different. I was whistling to my heart's desires. Everything was going as normal that night, and I slept in the room at the very back of our house. My grandmother was in the room just outside of mine. It was kind of like a sitting room. I'm not sure what Americans call it. The lounge, I guess? I was sleeping away until my grandmother shook me to wake up. I'm a very heavy sleeper, but when she began to wake me up, I got up right away, and that never happens. As soon as I woke up, I could see the fear and shock in her eyes. I will never forget the way she looked at me. She told me I couldn't sleep in that room, and instead made me sleep with her in one of the rooms at the front of the house. So the rooms from the front to the back were pretty far away. Initially, I was confused, like, why can't I sleep in that room? And why did she look so scared? She didn't tell me that night, but the next day, she asked me if I heard anything that night, and I said no. She then told me that while she was in the other room, she heard someone standing right outside my window, whistling. I always wondered what would have happened if my grandmother wasn't there, or if she didn't hear it. Even though I wasn't a witness to this, I truly do believe her. And ever since that day, I don't ever whistle at night again. By the way, I did some research on the mirrors. I found out that if you sleep in a room that has a mirror in it, and that you can see it from where you sleep, and an open window, you're basically calling your dead ancestors to come knocking. So let this be a warning. If you're in bed tonight, in your own room, and you can see a mirror from where you're at, I would recommend you get rid of it. That is, if it's not too late. Hi everyone. This story comes from one of my friends who used to be a ranger at the national park I work at, and not from my personal experience. I asked him to tell me his scariest experience at the job, and it just so happened to be his last. I'll tell it from the first person view. My normal shifts were during the day, 9 to 5 like most people. But on that day, we were shorthanded on the night shift, because the last person who worked during those hours had just quit. Lately, we had a whole lot of people quitting the night shift, so that meant that I had to cover. Strange enough, I never had to work the graveyard shift before then, and I was actually excited for it. I had brought some coffee and 5-hour energy shots with me because the hours ran 10 to 5, and there was no way I would make it that far naturally. I got to my tower right before 10 o'clock, when it was already pitch black, and the cold July night had fully set in. The tower was very tall, with several flights of stairs leading up to the top. The whole thing was mostly surrounded by thick forest, except for the trail I came in from, and a murky pond that was just to the right of one of the tower legs. I climbed up, and all I could hear was the non-stop sounds of crickets, frogs, and the occasional owl. When I hit the top, I fumbled with my keys until I finally found the right one, and walked right on in. The one room was small and square-shaped. 3 of the walls were mostly glass, and the other one wasn't, and had a door I just came in. The roof went up like a pyramid for some short feet, until it peaked, and it was all made of wood. To my left was a nicely made bed, and a nightstand with a lamp and a flashlight on top. It's not like I'm gonna be using the bed though. On the wall next to that was my CB radio and communication stand, which every one of these towers had. Next to that sat my fridge and microwave, which was part of a small kitchen that extended to the other wall as well. Inside the kitchen on the right wall were several cabinets, some small ones that held snacks and some canned foods, and another set of giant cabinets that I couldn't open, which most likely had vacuums and other cleaning supplies that weren't above my pay grade. I went over to the communication stand and did my standard check to make sure everything was working. I called into the ranger station's channel and said, "Hey Donnie, it looks like it's just you and me tonight." Donnie didn't say anything back, so I figured he was just taking a shit. I went and grabbed a flashlight on the stand and reached into one of its drawers, pulling out a set of binoculars from it. I went back out to the balcony and checked to make sure no fire hazards or any other kind of dangerous things were over there. Once I checked that box off my to-do list, I headed back inside and pulled out the chair from the communication stand and put it by one of the glass walls, and grabbed a granola bar from one of the kitchen cabinets to munch on. I raised the binoculars up to my eyes and looked over to the surrounding forest. It didn't seem like any animals were up and about, and no birds were in the sky. I skimmed over a couple of clearings to make sure that no teenagers were off camping illegally. Then I went and peeked over at a far ridge, where I saw a snowman standing alone in the gap of the trees. Hold the fuck up. It was July. I looked again to see it wasn't a snowman, but some kid in a shitty ghost costume. It looked like the ones from Charlie Brown, with the big black holes for eyes that looked more like they were colored black than actual holes. The kid was still and staring right into where I was at. unmoving. I couldn't see the kid's parents anywhere. And by now, it was rolling up to be 11 o'clock, so that meant something was up. I broke contact on the kid and walked to the radio, calling into the station. Hey Donnie, are you done taking a shit yet? I barely made it out, but I'm here now. I chuckle. Donnie was always good for a laugh. There's some kid with a blanket walking around the southeast sector. And they look alone. A blanket? What the hell are you even talking about? It's a ghost costume. It's got the black holes for eyes and stuff. You mean like the Charlie Brown costume? Can you check it out? Yeah, I'll go and see what's up. I'll call in on the walkie-talkie to tell you what I see. Roger that. I turned off the radio and crossed over to the nightstand drawer to grab the walkie-talkie. Once I had it, I sat back down in the chair and put the binoculars up to my eyes, zooming in to where the kid was. The ridge was empty, with no kid in sight, which I knew would make this 1,000 times harder. I pulled up the antenna on the walkie-talkie and dialed to the right channel. Donnie, you hear me? Yep, loud and clear. I'm getting close to the sector. I'm heading up to a ridge for a better view. Perfect. That's where I saw the kid, but they moved on since then. Well, I'm just gonna check around to see if I can find anything. I watched as Donnie came over to the ridge, waving his flashlight around the dark, until he looked towards the tower and shrugged. Nothing over here. Damn. Hopefully he turns up again. Until then, I'll just notify the police and check with any missing reports. Alright, I'm gonna go back to where Donnie's voice cut out, and I saw his flashlight turn off in the distance. The spot where he was at was swallowed in by darkness. Donnie, are you there? I heard no response, and I quickly rushed outside the door and around the corner to where I saw him, yelling his name, only to hear my voice echo in the woods. And that's when it hit me. There wasn't a single other sound in the whole forest. The crickets and frogs had stopped chirping. The wind didn't rustle through the leaves. Everything was completely standstill. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, and nothing else. I moved my flashlight around the woods, attempting to find them. I got into that state of mind where I got so scared my throat closed up, and if I moved, I felt like something very bad was gonna happen. I had to do something. I turned around, and as I did, I glanced at the stairs below me. At the bottom of the stairs stood a skinny, horrible, angled woman. She was tall, dripping with water, with black hair and dark, murky blue skin that was stretching across her bent and broken bones. Her gray dress was shredded, and her black shoes were muddy and wet. And her face, her eyes were milky white, and her mouth hung wide open like a snake, like her jaw had been broken. She let out a blood-curdling and ear-piercing scream of agony, and began to shuffle up the stairs so fucking fast that I snapped out of my fear lock and I ran the fuck back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. There was no way she could run that fast, even if all of her bones weren't broken in wrong directions. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and then I pulled out the walkie-talkie, screaming into it. Is anyone there? Donnie, where the fuck are you, man? Someone, answer me. Then I heard the cracking of a door. I slowly turned, and I froze when I saw what was there. The door was still there, locked and shut, and had been completely undisturbed. What scared me was the giant cabinet that was supposed to be locked now stood open, with a kid dressed like a Charlie Brown ghost standing just in front of it. I stood there, not moving until I heard the little shit giggle. I recognized that giggle. No fucking way. I pulled off the sheet to see one of Donnie's kids, Marvin, sporting a smirk and a walkie-talkie. Dad, I got him. I bet he pissed his pants just like I said he would, right? He and his other son laughed from the other end of the walkie. I was mad. but also glad that I wasn't about to get murdered in a wooden tower. I grabbed this walkie and shot back. Pissed me off is what you did, you fucking asshole. I hope you're happy. Hearing you scream like a little girl sure did make me happy, alright. Yeah, screw you too. That wasn't even me. That was your stupid zombie chick. Who even was that? Your wife? My what? Does the ghost look like a zombie from that far away? You said yourself it looked like Charlie. Not the ghost, dumbass. The woman on the stairs. She screamed and ran up them so that she could scare me into the tower. Hell, she must be like an Olympic runner. Who was that? Dean. I'm not exactly sure who you're talking about. I didn't put no woman on the stairs. After hearing that he would have the night shift for the next couple of weeks until they found a replacement, my friend quit and vowed to never go back to the park. To this day, he swears that either Donnie never told him about that part being a prank or that he saw something unrelated. I began to question my own participation in the night shifts and consider myself lucky that the few times I've been on it, I had been stationed at the north and east sectors. This happened when I was growing up, around 2004 or 2005, when I was about 13 years old. It took place in a good ways outside the town of Uvalde, Texas. The town itself was really small back then, and not much to look at. It's just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was around 1,000 acres down outside of that area and was complaining about a ton of hogs that were tearing up their land. Being open season on hogs in the south, my dad figured that he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting for them. Not only did this help him with networking for his job, but also gave us some quality father and son time. I remember the drive down from Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep. That car was so uncomfy. I absolutely hated it. The only thing I could do was stare out the window or try and beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket. Something I was never able to accomplish when I was younger. The drive obviously took most of the day. So we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he didn't have anyone lease it that year yet, and the cabin and the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in scouts for a couple of years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it out. So after unlocking the gate and driving to the cabin on the land, we settled in. The cabin was pretty rough, dust and dirt everywhere. I remember that it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the cabin and crapped on the floor. After cleaning up a bit, something about that night was weird. I never was able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I had that feeling that somebody was watching us. I was finally able to drift off for what I guess was an hour maybe. When we woke up, it was around 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was the summer, and it was very hot in the afternoons, so morning was the best time to be out and about. After walking for about an hour, we came to an area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hogs. Typical form up ground where they had been, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. However, some of their body was blocked by trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was there. Not to mention, the gate was locked up when we first arrived. The person was wearing some bright color red jacket. We slowly walked towards them. My dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunting out here. This is private land." The person didn't move at all. Dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that he was turned away from us, with his hands in his pockets. The weird thing was that the person was in a ski jacket and what looked to be ski pants. Now, this is Texas in the summer. It was about 98 outside by then. My dad called out again. No reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnapped the clip to his pistol holster. That's all we had at the time since we were only scouting the area. The rifles were back at the cabin. We approached the person's right side, and then my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed and crouched down. I watched them circle around to the form of the man, all the while talking to him, asking if he was okay. He finally passed around to the form of the man, and my dad stood straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out and said, "What's wrong?" And he called back saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad stood there staring at it, and as I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new. No dust, sap, bird droppings, or signs of it being outside for more than one day, at the most. At that moment, I looked at my dad and could see him get worried. Almost immediately after, I felt that feeling again, like we were being watched, like somebody was watching us, and I knew my dad was feeling it as well. I wanted to start crying. I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the whole way back while I was trying to hold back panicked tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was terrified, so it felt like an eternity, but it was only about 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and left. We drove back home that day, and we didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he was confused. He said that he would go check it out next week when he was in the area. He also said that he never had an issue with people because his property was high fenced. My dad normally isn't a paranoid person, but me being young, and the least possibly having someone there we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked, and my dad wasn't able to sleep the night before as well. He had the same feeling but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping too. Turns out that next week, he got a call from his buddy and he checked the whole property and never found any trace of anyone. No mannequin or anything. This experience still makes my hair stand on end. I have no idea what that was, but the paranoid man in me thinks it was some kind of trap or something. This isn't the creepiest thing that's happened to me in the woods, but it's definitely in my top 3. As many of you might already know, many Navajo people, including my own family, are very reluctant to speak about skinwalkers because it is believed to attract their attention. However, I grew up away from the Navajo Nation and was very naive about the subject. When it came to skinwalkers, I was an absolute skeptic. My mom used to tell a story of how back in the 80s when she lived with her siblings and my grandparents, who are still in Shiprock, about how she and my aunt saw a skinwalker just outside her driveway under a streetlight. She described it as a black dog with dirty fur, a twisted noodle-like front leg, and these unnatural eyes with a soft burnt orange glow. Me, being my own close-minded self, doubted every word. But I never said my doubts out loud. But these doubts totally changed last year when I went to my grandparents' house last October. Me and my family had just finished coming from the carnival at the Navajo Nation Fair. The house was close enough where we could walk home in just 10 minutes. So we did. When we got there, it was around 9 p.m. and we stayed up until 2 a.m. catching up about family affairs and the local news. It was at that time that I decided to open my mouth and ask the question, "Are skinwalkers real, y'all?" I asked. "You shouldn't be speaking about that," my grandma said with a disturbed tone. So she and my grandfather both decided to go to bed. After being scolded by my mom, one of my aunts chimes in with a very cautious tone and says, "Oh, they're real. I had a few start screaming outside of my trailer in Farmington just a few nights ago, and your cousin had nightmares the whole night and woke up crying that morning." Not wanting to push the discomfort any further, we all decided to go to bed. Now the trailer home is pretty old, and it was a really nice night, so we slept with the windows open with screens to prevent bugs coming in. Everyone had drifted off to sleep, except me. Why? Because my mind was still going on a million miles about skinwalkers, and I wonder if I ever encountered one while here on the reservation. As a kid, I was told it's taboo to think about skinwalkers because it can still call their attention. And that's when shit totally hit the fan. Just as I was finally getting relaxed for sleep, I started to hear something moving outside. I get up from the couch and start walking towards the kitchen window. In the trailer, all the rooms have the lights out, so the only visible light that can be seen is from the porch light out front. I was thankful for this, because I told myself that if it was really a skinwalker outside, then hopefully it wouldn't notice me seeing it. So I muster up the courage and take a quick scan of outside. From the porch light, all I can see is the dusty ground and the vehicles that my family drove along with some old metal trash cans that stood beside the road. Looking for about a good 5 seconds, I wasn't able to see anything. So I was getting ready to turn around and walk back to bed, thinking it was just a stray cat or something. I must have only taken about 2 steps when I hear what sounded like a distorted scream coming from outside, definitely close by. With fear rising, I look outside again and there I see it. A coyote-like figure was staring at my direction from behind the cars, just outside of the reach of the porch light. Only it looked wrong and gave off an evil vibe just from seeing it. It was gray with a horrific orange-red soft glow that came from its eyes. I ran back to the bedroom. It was at this moment that I began to notice an awful stench in the air that smelled like rotten meat. I started trying to wake up my mom, who was like, "It's almost 3 a.m. What do you want?" I immediately began in a shaken voice, "There's something scary outside." Then she said, now annoyed because I woke her up, "It's most likely a stray animal or something. It's the REZ. Animals wander all the time at night." She obviously wasn't getting the drift of what I was saying, so I screamed, "There's some Blair Witch Project shit going on outside, Mom." That got her attention. "What the hell are you talking about?" she said. Then we heard it. The thing outside started making more of its dreadful like screams and started what sounded like trashing outside on the ground. "You hear that? That's what I'm talking about." So both her and I got back up, looked outside the window, and the coyote thing was making its way to the door. It was walking with an odd limp and dragged its back right leg. We could hear it start to scratch against the door. My mom went and got my dad, and they both started shouting in Navajo, all sorts of words telling the thing to go away and saying it's not welcome here. All this commotion was enough to get the rest of the trailer up as they came out into the hallway. The only thing my mom did was turn to them and said, "Skinwalker," while proceeding to point to the door. Apparently, they already knew exactly what to do, as my grandfather got out a handgun from a drawer and a bag of ashes. He coated a few bullets and loaded them into the gun and went straight to the door, yelling out more Navajo that was too fast for me to comprehend. He swung open the door and fired twice. Nothing. The thing was able to escape. "That's the fastest one I ever seen," said my grandpa. Next thing you know, the rest of my family and my parents are freaking out about what just happened, saying stuff like, What if it comes back tomorrow and it saw all of us? Does that mean we're targets now? Afterwards, my grandparents calmed everyone down, myself included, saying that we'll all be fine. The morning comes, and my grandparents call one of their neighbors and explain to them what happened. Apparently one of them is a medicine man who used to partake in Navajo ceremonies used for healing and curing sickness. And so he came over to bless each family member and also the grounds outside.